Words of Psalm 18, verses 1 through 3. These tradition holds that these are the words of David lifted up on the day of his deliverance from Saul. Psalm chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So I shall be saved from my enemies. This is the word of God for the people of God, and together we say, thanks be to God. Well, friends, years ago, I went through a low time. Kind of hit bottom. And if you've lived long enough, you've experienced that. You've been through something like that. Maybe your time was even lower than mine. I don't know. It's not really about that, okay? We don't come here to judge each other's bottoms, y'all. Now, don't let that be the only thing you hear me say today, okay? But it's true. We all go through these hard times. I went through a really challenging time. I felt like I was at bottom. I felt lost. I felt adrift. And there were a couple things I started to do during that season, okay? One of them was I would go out. I lived in a warm place. I would go out barefoot and just walk. Just walk the sidewalks in my neighborhood. And one day I was walking along, and I saw there was in front of me this young father and his little girl, toddler, maybe 3 years old, and they were walking together hand in hand, and he turned and cleared his throat and spit on the ground. And the little girl, as children do, was watching him, and she turned and spit on his shoe. And I laughed out loud, and he kind of turned and scowled at me, you know. But the reason that memory stuck with me, I thought it was just funny, okay, a good life lesson there about, kids noticing. But the other reason I remembered that is because afterward it occurred to me that was the first time that I had laughed out loud in 3 months, okay? The second thing that I started to do during that time was recommit myself to prayer, okay? And I would lie on my back. It'd be harder to do this now. It's tougher to get up with my knee the way it is. But I would lie on my back on the floor of my apartment and just seek to give myself over, right? Open myself and allow myself to be cleared out of all the chaos and the anxiety that was within me, and invite God with a word. There was a word that I repeated over and over and over again. Must have been thousands of times over the course of those months. Maranatha, 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 which means come Lord, come Lord, come Lord. It was my invitation to God to come and help. Come and help, oh God. Friends, I have to confess that, during that season, my favorite time of day was the middle of the night when I was asleep, because that was the one time that I didn't feel that knot, of anxiety at the center of my chest, right? And my least favorite time of day was that liminal space between sleeping and waking, just as I began to wake up and that knot took hold again, and I realized I was going to have to make it through another day. Maranatha, Maranatha, come Lord. I prayed it again and again and again. And there were so many moments as I did that I felt like I was just adrift, just lost, spinning in the emptiness of grief and despair. And then one morning, as I prayed that one word prayer, it hit me that I couldn't be adrift. I couldn't be alone. It couldn't be the case that I had nothing, because I could feel the earth at my back. Friends, we're in week 2 of Lent right now, Lenten season. And our theme that we're exploring through this season is falling upward, okay? And it's a reminder that moving into the joy, the peace, the wholeness of Christ it's not some kind of linear upward progression, right? It has to start with a fall. It has to start with a letting go, with a giving ourselves over to our God. Pastor Austin set up the series for us last week, and today I'd like to start with what has to be the first step in this process. It's not a step that we want to talk about. It's not a step that we want to live into, but we can't skip this step, and the step is hitting bottom, okay? Hitting bottom. You've been there. You've been there. This happens for all kinds of reasons, right? Loss of a beloved one, family member, or a friend. Loss of a dream, right? Loss of your story, some kind of failure, right? It happens in grief for our world, right? It happens because of illness or the ravages of addiction, some kind of tragedy, some kind of disaster. We have examples in Scripture. We see it several times. The parable of the prodigal son, right? This guy has a dream for his own life that he's going to go out and chase. And as you know, it doesn't work out, does it? And he finds himself, Luke chapter 15, verses 15 and 16. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. Rock bottom, right? I think of the widow of Nain in Luke 7, who's lost both her husband and her son, and her means of support in life. She's lost everything, right? Rock bottom. Peter in Luke 22, this is the guy on whom the entire church is going to be built. Petros, the rock, right? Luke 22, he has done the unimaginable. He has denied his rabbi, his teacher, who happens to be the Son of God. And he finds himself right there, Luke 22, verse 62, rock bottom. And he went out, the text says, and wept bitterly. All right, now what happens? What happens when you hit bottom, church? 2 things. First of all, you're going to die down there. You're going to die down there. Now, the question is, what kind of death will it be? All right, far too often, I've got a cousin who was a heroin addict, and he hit bottom and never came out. We see this with Judas. It happens far too often, right? But it doesn't have to happen that way. It doesn't have to happen that way. What has to die is ego. And understand when I say that, I'm not talking about, I'm not saying that you're a bad person, okay? I'm not calling you some kind of bigoted, prideful jerk, okay? Everybody's got ego. We all struggle with this. We all struggle to let go. We write our own stories, the autobiography of how we expect things to go, how we want things to go in our lives, right? We all have hopes for ourselves and our families. We all want to be comfortable. We all want to feel like we're doing things the right way, right? We all think of purpose as that thing that gives our lives meaning and joy and blessing, right? Instead of being something that we pour ourselves into, the fruition of which we will probably never see, right? We all want to hold on to the belief that we and the people that we love and the way of life that we're used to will live forever. The bottom is where all of that dies. The bottom is where all of that dies, where the story that you've written about who you are and how your life is going to go disintegrates. It falls to pieces, and you you find that you just can't put all the pieces back together anymore. And that's when the second thing happens. Even as you think you are falling alone, adrift through this primordial mud of despair, even as you begin to think that, you feel the bedrock at your back. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. How does the song go? On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. See, beneath that sinking sand of our autobiographies, right? The stories that we like to tell ourselves about how life is going to go, beneath all of that is the bedrock of a greater story. The story that God is telling about us, right? A story that began in the primordial soup of creation and carries through all the way to kingdom come. God's story, a story that plays out across millennia. It's a story that bears us up, that defines us, and that holds us every single day. Job, think about this guy, right? He thinks he's been treated unfairly. And what does God say? Job chapter 38, verse 4, God says, "Oh, really? You've been treated? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy?" You might not be looking at the big picture, buddy. God says to Job. Now here's the thing, friends. Here's the thing I want you to take away, okay? You do not have to fall all the way to rock bottom, as far as you possibly can. Maybe, could the prodigal son have fallen further? Maybe. I don't know, but he chose to go home. You do not have to choose to fall all the way to the eventual rock bottom if you are willing to let ego die. You have the opportunity to make where you are the bottom if you are willing to come to the foot of the cross and let ego die. When you're willing to die to ego, to do the work, you will find that you are held by the hand, by the bedrock of your God. I had a conversation that was very meaningful to me, maybe one of my most favorite conversations I've ever had as a pastor, I don't know, a year or so ago. I was talking to a young dad who had gotten really hard news about his little boy, okay? Health diagnosis about his son. You want to talk about a hitting bottom, okay? And that dad said to me, I choose God, I choose faith. I'm so grieved at the loss of the story that I thought my son was going to have. But what I'm beginning to realize here at the bottom is that my son is good, that his life will be good, that my vision for his life is not the measuring stick of his value, right? He will be who God created him to be. He will be enough, and I'm going to do everything I can to give him the best, most full, most blessed life I possibly can, trusting that my God will hold him. Friends, as we as we lean into this Lenten season together, I want to challenge you to give your story, the story of your life, over into God's hands. That you would give it over into God's story, trusting that God will hold you. It doesn't mean that everything is suddenly going to feel good and feel easy, but I promise you that you will find that you are held up, that you are girded up by the bedrock of the hand of God, and that God will not let you down. And from there, and we'll talk about that next week. God bless you, church.